I'm Ted Knowlton. I'm the Deputy Director at Wasatch Front Regional Council, and I'm going to stop talking. With me today that are going to be your waiters and waitresses as you yourself put your finger, I'm mixing metaphors is what I'm doing, is Betsy Byrne. Betsy, raise your hand. Betsy with Envision Utah. And Betsy's going to talk about Utahns' green infrastructure values pulled from the 50,000 plus participation effort of the Your Utah, Your Future process. Sarah's going to talk about something that you may or may not have heard of, green infrastructure. Raise your hand if you've heard the term green infrastructure. Okay.
So we can skip me.
And then Sarah is with the Ecological Planning Center at the University of Utah. And then Christy Ostema is going to be your facilitator. Christy is with People and Places and has lots of experience running workshops like this. And so without further ado, I think it's a French word, Betsy, take it away.
Great, thanks. Can I actually, yes I can. All right. Hi, like Ted said, my name is Betsy Byrne and I'm a planner with Envision Utah. And I'm going to just share with you a couple of the results from the Your Utah, Your Future process that we just finished last year. And if you were at the lunch session, you saw Robert Groh. He talked a little bit about that process. And the Lieutenant Governor spoke a little bit about it as well. And he set us up really well for this session and talking about how important it is to have access for recreation, for trails, parks, places to have healthy, locally produced food, especially along the urban Wasatch Front as we grow. So just a reminder about the survey, we pulled together 400 different experts on 11 different topics, and we received over 52,000 people responding to that survey. And Dan Jones actually conducted a statistical survey to validate those results as well at the same time. And part of that process, we did a values study to identify what aspects Utahns value most about our quality of life here, and also the underlying emotions that are tied to that. And basically to understand, why do people love to live here? And so that we can make sort of an emotional case for how we need to grow. And we took those ladders and we presented those to the public. It helped us inform our scenarios. This one is about recreation. We found that Utah's scenic beauty and our ability to get outside and recreate is deeply tied to the core values of Utahns, which isn't really a surprise. We all love to get out and recreate, and we love to do that with families and friends, and it gives us a sense of peace and well-being and personal enjoyment. Utahns also value quality, locally produced foods, and they like that because it makes them feel like they're making healthier choices for themselves and their families, which causes them to worry less, gives them a sense of doing the right thing for their kids and for future generations. Utahns also value clean water, and they value that because it's for to maintain our scenic beauty here in the state, and to improve the environment for plants and for wildlife. And that makes us feel like we're better stewards of our state, of our natural resources, and also just of the planet as a whole. So these values deeply tied to the choices that we make, especially as we grow. And we presented these to the public in the survey, and through scenarios, asked people what they want to see as Utah changes and grows to 2050. And we also showed them what some of the impacts would be from some of those changes through these scenarios. And over 80% of Utahns chose a scenario that included a significant investment in increasing the number of facilities we have in terms of soft surface and hard surface trails, campsites, parks, boat launches, all different kinds of facilities, both along the urban Wasatch Front and scattered out throughout the state. And through that, we pulled a strategy that we put into the vision, which is provide an interconnected network of parks and trails in the urban area as we grow, so that people have that close access to recreation that Lieutenant Governor talked about earlier today. We also asked specifically what Utahns are willing to do to improve recreation. We asked them, do you support community park and trail systems if it involves a small tax increase? And over 67% said yes, yeah, we support that, we want that. Only 18% were opposed to that idea. In terms of agriculture, it was a very strong result. About 97% of the people who took the survey chose one of the scenarios that involved substantially increasing the amount of food production that we have in the state by 2050. And the strategy that we pulled from that is increasing the amount of locally produced food that we produce along the urban areas through community gardens and orchards and maintaining some of the ag land that we still have left along the Wasatch Front. We also asked what people want to see in terms of water as we balance our water needs by 2050. And people wanted to make sure we ensure that there's water in the streams for wildlife, but also for recreational purposes. And they want to maintain and improve water quality in our watersheds. And all three of these things are very deeply tied to the idea of green infrastructure, which Sarah is going to go into in a minute here. But in this idea of green infrastructure is very much impacted by how we grow and how we plan our communities. Depends on whether we'll have that access to those parks, to those trails, to healthy, locally grown food. And the green infrastructure has a number of benefits. Better access to recreation, better health. There's corridors for travel for both humans and for wildlife. And it has ecological benefits. It reduces the urban heat island effect, and it helps control and treat stormwater. So, and now I think we'll turn it over to Sarah. She's going to go into what green infrastructure actually is.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. So green infrastructure, I'm going to try not to be too academic, but I am just sort of going to get into the words and the language of the term green infrastructure, because I think it's a very powerful concept that I want to make sure that we're all on the same footing when we're talking about green infrastructure today. So this is a slide I use in my classes, and some of my former students are in here, so I think that they may have seen this slide before. Hearts nodding. What is infrastructure? So when we think about just the word infrastructure, it generally looks something like this. I don't know what this metal thing is, but it looks infrastructural, doesn't it? So infrastructure is simply the systems or facilities that provide services to a particular area or community, and it consists of things like our water supply, our transportation infrastructure, stormwater management, waste removal, communications, our energy supply, our food supply. I've added recreation on there. And so these are all things that communities need to provide in a collective, organized sort of way in order for the community to function. And here are some quick pictures this is generally what infrastructure looks like, right? There are engineers involved in creating infrastructure. So we have a good idea of what infrastructure means. So what is green? And I love doing Google image searches just to see sort of what the culture of the internet says about these things. And so there's this image where in order to make a city green, you just paint it green. You just grow some plants on all the surfaces, and it's very futuristic and beautiful. But what the green in green infrastructure is, it's kind of like this, but it's the living systems that provide ecological services to our communities. And that green infrastructure doesn't look like this, really, although it's starting to in Singapore. But it looks more like this. It looks like the places that we haven't built on. It is these natural systems that are providing, again, recreational opportunities. They are providing fresh food. They are providing both water and air purification. So this picture, if you can't quite tell, is taken from Daybreak, and it's a series of stormwater detention and retention ponds that are capturing runoff, they're controlling flooding, and they're contributing to cleansing that water as it runs off of the landscape. Green infrastructure provides beauty, which when you think about quality of life, is a really key component of what we enjoy about living in Utah. It contributes to health and well-being, both in terms of our ability to be active, to recreate, but also this role of beauty. There's a lot of research, more and more coming out every day, that points to access to nature as being really critical in supporting mental well-being for everybody. And there are studies that show that kids who walk to school through a more natural area have better learning outcomes, have less incidence of ADD and ADHD. Everything is just kind of better if you have a little bit of nature in your daily life. It contributes, again, to flood control. So these are all the services that are being provided to our communities by green infrastructure, which can be any of these different elements, from open space to soccer fields. You know, a soccer field, we don't think about it as green infrastructure, but it's recreation, and water can infiltrate through a soccer field. And last but not least, we love our urban trees, shade and cooling. It's a much better place to be in the summer if you're under a tree. So green, in this sense, basically means not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We have all this. We have all of this right now. We have a green infrastructure system, and we need to make sure that we don't let it go as we develop. So I wanted to give this, Betsy showed the same picture. So this is the Ogden River. How many people have been up there to see the Ogden River since it's been through its restoration? If you haven't been, you should go. It's a really beautiful place to spend some time. So the Ogden River, they invested, I think it was $6 million to restore the urban section of the Ogden River. They hauled entire cars, hundreds, maybe thousands of tires out of it. They hauled a lot of trash out of the Ogden River and restored it. And so it's now this beautiful place where you've got access to water. The water's pretty clean. There are trout that live in it. You can bike alongside it. You can kayak in it. This is a less obvious but very important element of green infrastructure associated with the Ogden River, where they have major storm pipes that flow into the river. They have constructed these vegetated wetland areas that are actually helping to cleanse the stormwater before it actually goes into the river. And there's now quite a lot of development that's booming in that area that's really using the restored Ogden River as a natural amenity where people want to live. So in the Wasatch Front, this is obvious. Everyone has said this today. We need to fit a bunch more people into the Wasatch Front, and green infrastructure is really threatened by that development. So what we want to talk about today is how, I might change this from a question to, how can we still have all this with another 1 million people in this space? And I want to argue that we can. I want to give you this quick green infrastructure framework that you probably can't read, but I'll tell you about it. What we're looking at here, my light's not working, there it is. Okay, so along the bottom here, we have a rural to urban gradient. And basically what we're seeing is that green infrastructure thinking, green infrastructure principles can be applied in different ways along this gradient. So if you're concerned about downtown Salt Lake City, you're probably not going to be conserving wildlands. That's just not in your portfolio in downtown Salt Lake. But you might be thinking a lot about street trees. You might be thinking about how can we reduce runoff and capture some of this stormwater and treat it so that it's more clean when it goes into the rivers. And if you're in a place that is, never mind, over on the other end, you might be looking at what areas can we preserve as open space where people can hike and run. As the Lieutenant Governor was pointing out, it's much nicer to run outside on a trail than it is on a treadmill. So along this gradient, there are a lot of different ways to implement green infrastructure. So depending on what table you're sitting at today, you might be thinking about some of these different ways. So on the far outside, you're looking at preserving what you've already got, preserving those ecological services. And on the more urban end, you're looking at where can we restore these ecological services. So this green infrastructure thinking is simply undeveloped land is not necessarily a blank canvas. What is there here that we might want to weave into future development that provides these ecosystem services? Nature does some things better than we can. It does it cheaper, and it can do a whole bunch of them at once. And in general, we are all better off when we work with nature instead of paving it over. So a quick example about how do we plan for green infrastructure. So green infrastructure, as that framework showed, applies at a range of scales. So you can see this in the Chicago area where they have a region-wide vision called the Chicago Wilderness Vision, I think it is, which looks at basically green infrastructure in the sort of conservation sense across the entire region. But then within that region, you have more local plans that are dealing with whatever their local issues are, whether it's stormwater, whether it's parks and recreation, whatever matters the most to those communities, they have their own green infrastructure plans that fall under the Chicago Wilderness Plan. And the last point, and I think this has been made over and over again today, if we don't weave what we want, if we don't weave the things that support our quality of life into our growth, it's really hard to get it back again. So that's why we're thinking about it here today. So I will now pass it on to Christy.
All right. Can I grab that?
You can. No, you can't.
Thank you. I just am more of a stander at this point in time of the day. And if you all want to stand, you may too. Okay, so we're gonna do some work together today. We're gonna think about priorities and outline some of those, and then outline the start of a vision for nature in 2050 in your specific area. So that's the real emphasis here. What matters most where you are? We'll be doing some laddering, some mapping, and some sharing. So real quickly with the laddering, the question is this: what green spaces matter most to you? What motivates you to get a network in place in your area? Maybe it's protecting or having access to that fresh local food. I know Salt Lake City is in year 30 of its farmers market, lots of other markets and grocery stores at this point with local food. Maybe that matters to you. If so, those urban gardens and farms that are close to our cities matter a lot. Or maybe it's hiking Lone Peak or spending a day skiing, mountain recreation. Maybe that matters to you. Or maybe rural heritage and lifestyle is connected to your history. Lots of urbanites in Utah have rural roots. Or clean water. I have not been to Secret Lake, as this photographer has, with no people all around it, but it's a good reminder that our water comes from this area. And we need to make sure that the protections are in place from the top to the bottoms of our valleys to make sure we have that resource here. Maybe it's community parks or places to play and relax with your family and your friends. Or maybe it's places to enjoy nature. And you might think initially of Timpanogos or something like that right away. But what are those little hidden hollows in your community where kids can access nature every day? Those little forgotten corners. We think of lakes a lot of times when we think of water bodies, but really think about those creeks and the riparian areas that are supported by the creeks. Those are often the spaces that are in your community and that you have maybe a power to influence and make sure they're restored and enhanced, preserved over time. You see the Jordan River there on the left. We know that if you take the time to understand migration paths of larger creatures, you often also catch the habitats of those creatures that are much smaller. So think of the fingers of those corridors that reach down into your community. Or maybe getting around on your own 2 feet or 2 wheels without a motor matters most to you. We've got a lot of regional trails at this point. See the Jordan River Parkway, the Legacy Parkway. How are your communities connecting into those regional assets? Or maybe you just like the backdrop that is our experience of everyday life here in Utah. I love the urban forest in Salt Lake City and being able to look up at the mountains. Such a cool thing. So talk together about what connects you to green space. You've got a ladder. You're going to be putting rungs on the ladder, identifying what the priorities in your area are. That's the first activity. Some questions. What about your area's character or quality of life needs to remain? What opportunities have you enjoyed that need to be preserved? What needs to improve? What needs to be added or restored back into our region or your area's green infrastructure? What needs to be connected or reconnected? The second activity, also related to these questions, is mapping. You've got a map on your table, and if you're lonely and are the only one at a table, we're kind of arranged north to south and east to west here. Feel free to grab your map and cozy up with a neighbor and kind of work together on things. What you'll be doing is identifying your ideal green space network in your area. What do you want to see in 2050? And you use a green Sharpie for environmentally valuable places, orange or red for agriculture, and then blue for recreation. And take time to label it up so that people understand what you were thinking on your maps. We see community gardens here. We see daylighting a creek and adding a trail by that creek once it's daylighted. The colors might overlap, but that's okay. Just means that those lands are probably more important. And I want you to think big. Okay, so we have a lot of decades here to think about. I think of the McClellan Trail in my backyard, and that's been decades in the making, as it was just a line on the map for a lot of years, and it's breaking ground this year because over time people have been planning and setting aside bits and pieces of a really urban area to make that happen. Think about the west side of Salt Lake County. What happens if the Oakers have a different future by 2050? What if we're not mining there anymore? Big question. Or think about the creeks that run from the mountains to our valleys. What could you do with those corridors over time? Think 100 years out. Brian's your guy for that. Okay, and then finally, you've had those discussions. Take a minute to talk together about the one thing that matters most in your area. If you could just focus on one thing, maybe one aha as a table, figure out what that is, and we'll share that as a larger group. So we've got quite a bit of time. We'll convene, I think, about 3:40 and just do kind of a lightning round of your ahas, what matters most. But otherwise, you've got some reminder instructions in front of you. Please assign a facilitator, somebody to take some notes, and somebody to do a real quick speaking part for your table. I think that's all. So yeah, hop to it, enjoy the activity. And I think Ted mentioned, but this is really the start of informing 2050. So it's an important exercise today. Thank you. Otherwise, I think we're within our time frame. So we've got about 15 more minutes before we reconvene. So if you haven't transitioned to the mapping, now's a great time to get the Sharpies out and make sure that you express your priorities on the maps. We have about 10 minutes left. Make sure you're getting your ideas down on your maps. Okay, we're going to reconvene in just a minute. If you haven't had a conversation about what is your big thing that matters the most to you, what's your takeaway, your aha, what's most critical? One thing, make sure you can communicate that to the rest of the group in a minute. What one thing matters most in your area between now and 2050?
Maybe we don't. Do you think we need a sign-in sheet? I mean, I guess we have that. We know that they.
I could ask them all to put their name on the map.
If they put their name and email, then it tells us they have extra interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, who is ready to begin by sharing their big takeaway? While you're getting ready, I have one thing to request of you. If you are interested in continuing this conversation, we would love it if you would put your name and your email on the map. Actually, scratch that. Let's put it on the back of your ladder. That's a little easier to handle. Name and email. Just pass that around while you're listening to others. All right, I'm going to pick on this table right here first. They don't know that. One big takeaway. Okay, we'll be right back to you. One big takeaway. What's most important?
Okay, so what we looked at was, first of all, preserving some Utah County. We were the Utah County table. And Utah County, as of right now, has quite a bit of green assets that they're already dealing with. So we want to preserve a lot of those. And then what we really focused on is a network of trails that connects people from where they live and where they work to these green destinations. So it's about bringing destinations closer to where people live and allowing them to have continued access to a lot of the green zones that still exist in Utah County.
Really cool concept. Thanks. Yep. Real quick, this table, one takeaway.
Okay, we mainly focused on the creeks as opportunities to improve recreation, as well as our clean water and clean air top ladder aspects. So both utilizing the above ground sections as potential recreation pathways, and then the below ground sections as opportunities to daylight, as well as also create recreational pathways.
I'm sorry, there's Salt Lake County. Okay, how about you guys?
It's been delegated to me. So we're Salt Lake County as well. We focused a lot on the repairing corridors, canals, so converting or daylighting canals to recreational corridors. We also focused on some of our more arterial corridors like State Street and Redwood. If we thought differently about that infrastructure as it parallels Jordan River, trying to keep water cleaner before it dumps into the river. And reclaiming golf courses, at least in Salt Lake City, for more public spaces and recreation.
Really cool ideas. Who's up here?
We are Davis County, South Davis County, North Salt Lake area. What we wanted was to have parks close to our houses and trails that connect those parks together. And then we thought that preserving water and having clean functioning creeks and riparian areas was important, which can support that idea of having trails. We identified major corridors. There's already the Legacy Trail, but we identified a new mountain trail that's above the Bonneville shoreline. In Davis County, the Bonneville Shoreline Trail is paved street, which is, a regular roadway in Bountiful. But we have a better mountain trail, and we have a lot of east-west corridors that we identified through the waterways that would connect the lower lands to the highlands.
Great, thanks. I hope you all walk around and take a look at each other's maps, because even your differing geographies, but some of the maps are picking up some similar themes. Who's up here?
Yes, I'm up. Okay, we had Weber in North Davis County, and we were looking at a lot of regional trails throughout the corridor. Our top, I guess, what would you call it? Yeah, top green space. Yeah, on the ladder is clean water. We figured if we didn't have healthy residents, then they probably couldn't use the trails. So we wanted to protect the riparian areas. One thing that we noticed is if we didn't protect those areas, that they would become built on, and obviously we wouldn't be able to use those trails. And did I miss anything? Yeah, so if we protected the riparian areas, that would also, allow wildlife habitat to be protected. And we really liked to access the mountains, so we thought those were important.
Thanks. Yeah, sometimes if you protect one thing, you get lots of other benefits, right? Back here, Sumner?
So I've got the Western Summit County and Western Wasatch County map at this table, and started, considering some open space types, which is a favorite thing of mine. And what became apparent is what's not on this map. What's not on this map is the river corridors that go down to the Provo area and the river corridors that eventually go up into the Ogden area. So I'm biased with this location to preserve watersheds. I think watershed preservation in this area is critical, not only for this area, but for the Wasatch Front.
I think you're got a lot of people in agreement of that. Lots of watersheds, corridors mentioned. Linda.
I want you all to know we have 2 spokeswomen at this table. The rest of you all were guys, so. We have the western part of Utah County here, and we didn't know what a lot of it was, but we think that the river areas, which seem to be mostly part-time, should all be preserved. We don't know who owns all of this land, and there's a color on the map that we didn't recognize, but we decided it should all be protected, and where there are parks and things, we should have them, and the river trail should be completed and be big enough. And
yeah, so essentially where there's already existing open space or green space, that should be preserved. Some of these areas have steep grades, so they probably won't be developed, but as many of us know, the Northwest Utah County quadrant will see a lot of growth over the next 25, 35 years. My city in Eagle Mountain in particular is projected to increase in population by 425% over that time period. But there's a lot that can be done to preserve, again, the natural environment. Looking at Point of the Mountain area in Lehigh, we indicated that there should be more efforts there to, preserve the natural green space and open space. And for our value ladder, we have clean air and water as our very important top priority. Fresh local food would be great. Trails, active transportation, the cities are doing pretty well on that, but we'd like to improve that.
Great, thank you. And I just want to thank all of you for being involved. I appreciate that you're readily writing down your contact info. I think we'll find a way to be in touch. And I'll toss it back to Ted.
Okay, thanks, Christy. Hey, let me give you a very short sense of where this goes next, okay? About February of next year, the big ideas and the general themes and your motivations on the ladder will be used to craft 2 detailed scenarios that will then be considered by hopefully you, plus local officials, broader public, as part of a process to really dig into and say, what are the kinds of ideas that groups of communities can say, yeah, let's work on that big idea together. Okay, so that's what those scenarios will do with regard to green infrastructure. We'll take everything that happened here today and again, translate it into 2 more specific, detailed scenarios. And it's really important, and I'd love to have you come and be part of that process and weigh in what makes sense to you. Any questions about those next steps? From that then comes the development of the green infrastructure, nature, open space elements of the actual Wasatch Choice 2050 vision. Okay? Let's give Christy, Betsy, Sarah a hand. Thank you all for being here today, and we are adjourned. Thanks.